All right. Hello and welcome back. I'm Professor Peyton, and today we are talking on the Jewish question by Karl Marx. Okay. I have to tell you, though, before we get into this, because some people have been wilding out on my TikTok. Yes, we are engaging with Marxist theory, but I personally do not subscribe uncritically to Marxism as an entirely comprehensive framework, right? Like any historical body of thought or way of thinking, Marxist theory has its limitations, right? Particularly it's Eurocentrism, it's like anthropocentric assumptions, just the idea that humans come before the rest of the earth, right? Human supremacy, essentially. The theory itself can overlook the complex interplay of culture and affect and non-human agencies in shaping social realities. I'm talking like actual environmental concerns, right? But like no single theory, especially one developed in the 19th century, like literally no single theory can fully account for the challenges of our contemporary political and ecological crises. Okay. That being said, I find certain aspects of these Marxist texts invaluable for their critique of capitalism and for their insights on the structures of power and labor and ideology in general. Okay, my engagement with these works is not an endorsement of Marxism as an all-encompassing solution, okay? But I'm just trying to say this is more of a recognition that they provide useful tools for diagnosing the present, right? They spark these conversations. I read them alongside, if you look on this podcast, a lot of other critical traditions, right? Indigenous, feminist, decolonial, post-humanist perspectives, all of those things to develop a more nuanced and expansive analysis of the world that we currently inhabit. And that same approach that informs my research also informs this podcast, where my goal is not to present these works as definitive answers, but to make them more accessible and to spark conversations. This podcast is a starting point. It is not the entire conversation. Who the fuck do you think I am? Who the fuck do you think I am? Okay, I am encouraging listeners to engage critically, to challenge ideas, and bring your own perspective into the dialogue. That is what I value. So before we dive into the ideas of Karl Marx and the Jewish question, I want us to start with a moment that hopefully it's not too far gone, but the image of Elon Musk, one of the richest men in the world, standing before a cheering crowd, performing what was unmistakably a Nazi salute, right? It brings up something really unsettling about the current moment, which is the way that wealthy, powerful men flirt with ideologies of exclusion and domination while claiming that they are the champions of freedom and innovation, right? And this is where Marx's essay on the Jewish question becomes strikingly relevant, okay? It wasn't just this critique of anti-Semitism in like overt forms. It was a deeper analysis of how systems of power work. Okay. So at the time, a German philosopher named Bruno Bauer, he argued that Jewish people could only achieve equality if they gave up their religion entirely. Bauer claimed that religious difference was the root of inequality, not the structure of the state or the economic system. And Marx's response took that somewhere else. Okay, he argued that true emancipation for Jews and for everyone else wouldn't come from removing religion or cultural difference, but from dismantling the system that creates the inequality in the first place. Okay, and Marx's critique was a groundbreaking shift. He was not saying religion didn't matter, but rather that the focus on religion was a distraction. The real issue was the system of power and money that shaped everyone's lives, right? The daily lives, not the ideological, like what's going on in your values, your actual lived experience. For Marx, the problem wasn't just that people were being excluded of these systems because of their identity. It was that the entire system treated human beings as tools to generate profit. So fast forward to today, and Musk's Nazi salute serves as a chilling reminder of how power continues to operate, right? Musk claims to be this visionary, someone who's building the future with electric cars and rockets and AI. But his wealth and influence come from the same old system that Marx critiqued back in the 19th century, one built on exploitation, where workers are squeezed to generate profit for the people at the top, right? And when someone like Musk flirts with this far-right imagery very fucking publicly, and I don't even want to say flirt with, he full on like, right? He's not just making an edgy joke or flailing his arms, but whatever the fuck people are saying. He's tapping into a long history where powerful people use division, whether it's religion, race, class, gender, sexuality, whatever, to distract from the exploitation at the heart of the system. So this is why Marx's essay is so important for us to revisit right now. The Jewish question wasn't about Jewish emancipation. I mean, it was about asking a bigger question. What would it take for everyone to be free? And what stands in the way of that freedom? And Marx argued that as long as money and profit dominate society, no one can truly be free. Not Jewish people, not workers, not anyone. So when Musk plays to an audience that cheers for these authoritarian white supremacist gestures, he's leaning into an old tactic, right? He's using distraction and division to mask the real problem, which is the system that prioritizes profit over people. And when we recognize that, or at least remember, I'm summarizing this text here. Some of what I'm saying, I just want to make sure that you remember that I'm talking about a text, not necessarily my exact views. But when we recognize that the real problem is this system that prioritizes profit over people, we see that the fight against bigotry in any form isn't separate from the fight against capitalism, right? It's all part of the same struggle. And as Marx put it, every emancipation is a restoration of the human world and of human relationships to a man himself. True freedom doesn't come from token inclusion into a broken system, right? Or a seat at the table. It comes from tearing down that system, fucking breaking that table, and building one where everyone matters. To contextualize, Marx distinguishes between two types of emancipation. Political emancipation, which is the granting of legal and civil rights within a state, and human emancipation, which is the liberation of all people from these structural inequalities and alienation. So while political emancipation can address immediate inequalities, Marx saw that as insufficient because it doesn't actually dismantle the underlying systems of exploitation and alienation that make inequality inevitable, right? So think of U.S. Democrats here, right? They're not trying to undo the system. They just want it to look a little bit neater, a little bit more colorful, so to speak, right? And then we end up here, right? So in Marx's view, the modern state, even a secular and democratic one, was still built on the foundation of capitalism, which privileges private property and perpetuates class division. So Marx critiques the capitalist system as one that turns social relations into market relations, right? So you're not friends anymore, you're clients, right? Reducing people to individual self-interested actors. So he ties this to religion, not to just single out like Judaism or Christianity, but to make a broader point. Just as religion serves to mystify the real conditions of human existence, capitalism mystifies the exploitation at its core. And he provocatively claims that under capitalism, money becomes a kind of secular god, dictating human relations and perpetuating inequality, right? So true emancipation then requires dismantling not just religious illusions, but the economic structures that enforce domination and alienation. So what the fuck does this have to do with Elon Musk and Donald Trump? Or to the broader critique of capitalism that we have discussed earlier? So Marx's argument on the Jewish question sheds light on why partial or symbolic victories, right, token inclusion, within the current system fail to deliver real liberation. So capitalism, like the political state that Marx critiques, is designed to uphold the power of a few by exploiting the many. That is its working. So emancipation under capitalism, whether granting civil rights or diversifying corporate brands, right, rainbow capitalism, or extending representation for whatever, right, like those can be important steps forward, but they're pretty much just a fucking band-aid that you slap on a system that just fundamentally thrives on inequality. It's like optics, right? Choosing optics, the look of justice rather than the work that it actually takes to achieve justice at a large scale. So Musk and Trump, their wealth and their power are not just these like personal achievements. Remember, we talked about this last week, but they're products of the system that treats workers and natural resources and even like basic human needs as commodities to be exploited for profit. The rhetoric, whether it's Musk's technocratic sort of fantasies or Trump's populist posturing, they mirror this sort of mystification that Marx critiques, where they're framing systemic oppression as individual failure, the myth of meritocracy, while obscuring the exploitation that enables their immense wealth. Like, they're not owning up to the ways that they don't pay their fucking workers well, or they show up stiffing out these like contractors for all of these years to build their wealth, right? They're not going to acknowledge that. They're just going to say those people didn't work hard enough. So similarly, this idea that we can just achieve justice incrementally, remember we talked about in the last podcast episode, trickle-down justice doesn't work. Starting with one group and then moving to others mirrors the limitations of political emancipation that Marx identified. So just as political rights within an oppressive system don't eliminate the system's inequalities, prioritizing certain groups or communities while postponing justice for others leaves the underlying structures of oppression intact, right? So as long as capitalism and its accompanying hierarchies persist, true liberation is going to remain out of reach for all, but like the most privileged. So Marx wants us to think bigger. What would it mean to reject not just the inequalities of capitalism, but the very logic of exploitation on which it was built? On the Jewish question reminds us that liberation is not about reforming the existing system to accommodate more people. It is about transforming the system so that no one is left behind. And that vision ties directly to Marx's call in the Communist Manifesto for the working class to unite, not to just fight for their own personal emancipation, but to create a world where oppression of any kind is no longer possible. And true emancipation for Marx is not a matter of rights within the system, but the collective liberation of humanity from all systems of exploitation and domination. So neoliberalism, maybe you've heard that word, maybe not. We'll talk about it. Neoliberalism is more than just like an economic philosophy. It is a worldview that reimagines every human relationship as a market transaction. It's networking. I encourage you to read a book called Times Square Red, Times Square Blue by Samuel Delany. The second half of the book, it's this great critique on the difference between contact and networking. Like, this is sort of the networking that we're talking about, where, again, every human relationship is sort of like a market transaction. So neoliberalism has reasserted the dominance of free markets and deregulation and privatization, dismantling public goods and redefining citizenship as a matter of individual competition rather than collective belonging. Okay, so under neoliberalism, the market is not just a system, it's the only system. Like, it's not a system because it's just the only thing. It's the ultimate arbiter of value and morality and human worth. And that ideology has come to just sort of be at the center of a lot of Western politics and economics, embedding itself so deeply that even calls for justice often replicate the logic of the market. Like, we don't think we can get out of it. We just have to like find out how to do it a little bit better. That's the way that we're thinking. It's so deeply embedded that you're fucking delusional if you try to imagine anything outside of the logic of this market, right? So Karl Marx's insights into money as the alienated essence of human labor and life, that helps us understand the corrosive effects of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is a system that treats everything, okay, your job, your family, your worth as a person, like it's part of a big business, right? So diversity initiatives are sort of more about corporate branding than actual reparations for like historically marginalized communities. Neoliberalism says that the free market is essentially the answer to everything. So if you want a better life, you can work harder, you can sell yourself better, you can climb the ladder. And if you need healthcare or education, you can pay for it because nothing comes for free. You're not entitled to anything in this world that you did not ask to be born into. So in this system, you're not just a worker or a neighbor. You're like always a competitor in a game where only a few people are ever going to fucking win. And the problem is this way of running the world doesn't help anybody. Like maybe, I don't even know. I don't think it fucking serves them. Can you imagine how fucked up you have to be as evil as they are? I don't think it's serving them either, but it just keeps the rich getting richer and everyone else struggling to make ends meet, right? People like Musk and Trump are these examples because they did not just get rich because they worked harder or smarter than you. They fucking control the rules of the game, especially now more than ever. So why so many of you are trying to fucking defend them as if you're gonna like, I don't know, be like them one day? You're not. I'm sorry to break it to you, hun. You're stuck at the bottom with the rest of us. And the worst part is you are convinced that you're not. So they got you even worse. But anyway, so under neoliberalism, human beings are encouraged to sort of view themselves as commodities, right? Neoliberal capitalism, where success is measured by wealth and every interaction is framed as a transaction. And this shift is not just economic, but it's spiritual. Okay, as Marx writes, money is the jealous god of Israel, in face of which no other god may exist. Money degrades all the gods of man and turns them into commodities. Okay, so in the United States, this dynamic is sort of captured in this like cultural shift from in God we trust to what more accurately might be described as in the US dollar we trust, right? Those two concepts are now so deeply intertwined as wealth and prosperity have become seen as these signs of personal virtue and like almost like divine favors. So what Marx is talking about is that money has taken over everything. There is no facet of life that money has not touched in some way, and it decides what's valuable and what's not, right? It even gets to decide who gets to matter, who gets to decide what's valuable and what's not at a social level. So if you're rich, you're seen as important. If you're poor, people act like you're lazy or worthless, and money becomes the thing that we all chase. And in the process, we lose sight of like the people and relationships and just like general world that we are sharing. And that is sort of the illusion of inclusion under neoliberalism, right? It promises that anyone can rise to the top as long as they don't fucking rock the boat too much and just sort of want like diversity on corporate boards or high profile individual success stories, right? No one wants to be challenging the underlying system that is perpetuating the exploitation and inequality. Neoliberalism tells us that the solution to inequality is to diversify the elites to ensure that everyone has this equal opportunity to succeed within the system, but it doesn't actually even do very much to challenge the system itself, which is predicated on exploitation, which is just so paradoxical about the moment right now, because obviously, as we see Trump attacking and the Trump admin attacking DEI initiatives, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, that is important stuff, right? Especially in the context of their larger plan that they want to put into effect. But like, as a Chicana who has studied, I have a master's in women's gender and sexuality studies, I fucking understand the importance of DEI initiatives and also have always been critical of what that even does, because it doesn't do much at all systemically, right? In terms of an individual like experience, that makes some waves, but systemically, we were a tiny department with very little funding. So as a society, we have to start asking ourselves, what does it mean to trust in each other rather than in the dollar, right? To value people not as commodities, but as members of a shared human community. Those are not easy questions, right? There's a lot of shit that comes up when you actually start to stare those questions down in the face, even when you think you're the most fucking leftist person there is, okay? Marx reminds us the first step is to see the system for what it is, which is a system that separates us from our labor and reduces us to our labor and isolates us and keeps us even out of alignment with knowing ourselves. And we're not allowed to dare to imagine something more. With that, I want us to understand how complicated these discussions actually are about these DEI rollbacks that the Trump administration is pushing out. Because on one hand, it's devastating. And on the other, what are we fucking going to do about it? Are we going to just keep fighting to be included? Or are we going to recognize that their ability to fucking take it away like that is part of why it doesn't fucking work? All right. It's not enough anyway. It's important and it's not enough. So when I just want to also say before I hop off of here, when we're dealing with these revolutionary kinds of thought, you have to allow yourself to tap into your imagination and creativity, because like you can't see it. It doesn't exist. The world that we're talking about, it doesn't exist yet. Okay. And it hasn't existed because there's been no point in time where we've been in this exact situation and then come up the other end of it, right? We can learn from history. And this is a very different situation than all of those combined, right? It's almost sort of a culmination of a lot of those different things happening combined. So I want us to be really mindful of the conversations that we're having and the ways that we're talking about things, because reducing these DEI initiatives to like a liberal view where you're just trying to get those seats back at the table, I have to tell you that's not going to be enough, right? Because we're in this situation because it wasn't enough. And also, you have to hold space for the fact that those were really important initiatives. Those are really important, right? Essentially, what I'm trying to say is these are complicated situations that we're in. And it's important to be mindful about all of the different ways that we're thinking about this, especially because since I've been talking about Marx, like specifically, I have so many philosophy bros coming at me so hard with all these words. I, as a doctor of philosophy, I don't fucking know what you're talking about. Like, I'm coming from Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, Gaudian Saldua, like all those kinds of thinkers. And you're talking about all these other ones that like are fucking old white men, and that's not working. So, okay, I think you get what I'm trying to say. If you don't, you can leave me a mean comment. I don't give a fuck. But I will try to respond to you with compassion as long as you're not a Nazi. Anyway, thanks for listening. This one went off the deep end, huh? All right. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.